Okay, welcome back to our quite sporadic videos as the other half. So me and Sue are doing just little discussions about pertinent chapters of the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health. And this one's by Martin Seager and John Barry, and it's a really succinct one about gamma bias, which is basically they've condensed what can be quite hard to articulate into a kind of really clean concept, which is, let me just read out the title of the thing because I don't want to ramble before I do that. Where the hell is it? Hang on. So, it's called Cognitive Distortion in Thinking About Gender Issues, Gamma Bias and the Gender Distortion Matrix. So it's basically about how culturally Western, and we're talking about Western civilization, we're in a place now where women are disproportionately celebrated for various things, but often for actually just being women. And I'm really marrying it. I just need to find my notes. Sorry, I should have just started properly.
Do you want to define gamma bias while you're doing that?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So gamma bias occurs when one gender difference is minimised whilst simultaneously another is magnified.
Yeah. And
you were touching on one of those, weren't you, where women are celebrated for achievements and for simply being women in a way that men are not.
Yeah, and the way they've broken it down is they've made a little table that says at the top, good and harm. So if you're a female, you're more likely to be seen to do good, and if you're a male, you're more likely to be seen to do harm. And if you're a male, you're more likely to be seen to receive good, i.e., you're privileged. You kind of receive privileged status. You receive privileged pay. All sorts of ways that you're privileged. But if you're a female, you're more likely to be receive harm. And these are what the proposition is here is that this is another cognitive distortion, and we cognitive biases have been around. We've been talking about them since the 60s. There was really good research by two Israeli psychologists in the 60s called Daniel Kahneman and Tversky. I can't remember Tversky's first name. Have you ever heard about this?
No.
They came up with all these heuristics.
No.
So like availability bias, which is our tendency to go with whatever the most easily accessible information is to hand in our brains. That kind of imprints on our consciousness a kind of disproportionate significance. So if I'm trying to think of something and all I can think of is, the last time let me try and think of an example. So yeah, if I'm in an argument with you and I don't really know what you're talking about, but I can just remember some stuff that I was talking to someone else about, I might then start using that disproportionately, and it kind of it gives us a sense of certainty that's not really based on empirical, like rational fact, but more just about like the fact that we can get hold of that information and pull it forward and start talking about it. But there's loads, and these at the start of this article they reference Aaron Beck, who in the 60s came up with kind of thinking errors, which they've turned into what are now called thinking errors in CBT, aren't they? Like black and white thinking, catastrophizing, minimization, overgeneralization, and so on. And Barry and Seager have picked up on the minimization and magnification. So they go and break down each of these good and harm categories, and this material we've kind of discussed in our other videos quite a few times, but it's just packaged really nicely in this article because it's because of the structure. Because so for example, doing good, females are seen to do good, whereas males are seen to do harm generally. And in the doing good bit, they've given some examples. So one is that the UN has recognised 4 different days to celebrate women. Another one is that the suffragette movement is really celebrated, but no one remembers the 44% of men who got the vote in 1918 after men died in the war. And an interesting one they add is, here, like in the tabloid press, you often get stories about war heroes or emergency services heroes, and the fact that they're usually male is never commented on. They're just heroes. But if they're women, it's actually always commented on. And similarly, like women in high-level business or politics or science or these careers, they're celebrated for being women in these positions.
At the time we're recording this, we're coming up to Remembrance Sunday, aren't we?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard that Remembrance Sunday celebrations have been cancelled in London. Yeah, not allowed to, people are not going to be allowed to go to the cenotaph. And I couldn't help but think, if it was a celebration of women, I wonder how easily that could be carelessly closed down. There's going to be something behind closed doors, which no doubt will include a veteran or 2, but they've cancelled the celebration that's been occurring since the end of the war, Second World War.
God.
Yeah. Is that the first you heard of it, Zac?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know anything.
So it only came out yesterday. Yeah, no, it only came out. I was just commenting on your shock. Really, you looked shocked about it.
Yeah, I think maybe
I was shocked about it.
I think that's quite symbolic, isn't it? It's quite a sacred event. That I feel
it is, and it's a celebration of masculinity
and the sacrifice
on
and the service, and to shut it down.
Yeah.
When actually we've had loads of protests have been allowed.
Yes. Yeah, protests.
Protests have been allowed, but honouring the service of men who have sacrificed isn't allowed.
Yeah, that's just what veterans have been saying. How come BLM have been allowed protests, Extinction Rebellion have been allowed protests. To some degree, COVID-19 have been allowed protests.
What do you mean by COVID-19?
Protests about
taking
taking
lockdown.
Free speech and civil liberties away from people.
Yeah, they had one last weekend, I think, didn't they?
Yeah.
Feels maybe, I don't know, it feels maybe like that's a Rubicon moment, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
It could be a big wake-up moment for people, couldn't it? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And I noticed there was like I don't really follow the news, but somewhere I read that there was an organisation, a group of veterans who were kind of trying to protect the statues around the UK from people, defacing them and pulling them down. And I guess maybe that sort of activity would have put them on the business end of, politically correct people.
Possibly.
I don't know.
Possibly.
Yeah. Sad, isn't it?
Well, I'm sad that there isn't the will there to make something happen. To make something happen.
Yeah. Wow.
It seems related in terms of the minimisation of male contribution, male achievement, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Man's service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want to go on and do the male minimisation piece there for doing good? So in the doing good category, males are minimised.
Just want to say, because I think you missed a couple of female magnification. I think you touched on it in your introduction, so that's probably why you didn't repeat it. But this idea of celebrating women simply because they're women, for their gender alone, and celebrate them for their beauty, for fashion, for sexuality, and motherhood. Yes, then you mentioned the UN and special days dedicated to women and suffragettes and careers and achievements of women being celebrated in a way that they're not for men. So male minimisation, not celebrating men collectively, not celebrating men for their gender alone, only celebrating particular achievements of particular men, individual men. The UN's got no special day to celebrate men.
Is there one in England?
There's an international International Men's Day, isn't there, on November the 19th, so it's coming up, but it's not recognised by the United Nations. Heroism within the military and the emergency service often remarked about on the news, but gender's not usually referred to. And I've noticed often news will report number of deaths of personnel, or talk about bodies, but they don't say men. But where those personnel or bodies are females or children, that will be their gender or status will be mentioned. So,
right, yeah.
Men's deaths are reported as personnel or lost in service or body count, but not specifically identified as men.
And there's some, just to touch on that in another way, later in the chapter they kind of put forward hypotheses for why it's like this, and one is that males' lives are less valuable in terms of reproduction, because you only need, a man can father, almost unlimited numbers of children, but not if there's only one woman. So you need, women as a kind of reproductive resource. So this language doesn't sound very kind of empathic, but
it's biological.
But there's sort of maybe there's like a biological kind of reality about like how valuable a man's life is versus a woman, and maybe on some level we all kind of tacitly, implicitly understand that, and that would maybe explain. I don't think anyone would agree with that if you actually talked like normally about it, but maybe it's a sort of just underneath, so you know it comes out in the way that you're saying, like no one bothers going into detail about deaths unless it's a female.
Yes, if you consciously ask them their view, that would be different from what's happening unconsciously, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so, yes, Seager and Barry talk about the rescue of boys by male cave divers in Thailand.
Oh yeah,
and,
that's when, what's he called, the Tesla guy got involved. Elon Musk, and it all got a bit weird, didn't it, at the end?
I don't remember.
There was a sort of there was some insults exchanged on Twitter.
Oh.
And I think I can't remember, but I think he maybe had to sort of apologise or something. I don't. It's a weird story, but yeah.
Yeah, the brave deeds were acknowledged, but not their gender. And then the Titanic, which I always go back to. I think it's a fabulous example of male chivalry. You know, that most men drowned 80%, most women survived 75%.
Yeah.
And that is a story that's so famous, but never celebrates masculinity in a positive way. It's quite invisible.
Yeah.
Working class sacrifice. I mean, it's so true. If there is such a thing as patriarchy, and I doubt it very much, you know, where the power lies is in a handful of few wealthy men. The majority of men, you know, sacrifice. They have built the infrastructure. They provide the security for society. They experience 96% of the deaths at work. They do dirty, dangerous, heavy, antisocial hours, jobs, with little thanks, really. Yeah, and it made me laugh. Seager and Barry talk about builders being seen as wolf whistlers, you know, rather than DIY heroes.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, male suffrage, actually, not a majority, 44% of men only got the vote for the first time in 1918, which was shortly before the women got the vote, wasn't it? And we don't celebrate fatherhood or male childcare, and how we're actually quite suspicious of men wanting to look after children. We're suspicious and negative about it, and perhaps question their motives for doing so.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of evidence showing how beneficial, you know, that triangulation can be when a child has access to its mother and its father, or those roles.
I don't think there's a lot, Zac. I think there's some very convincing, but I don't think enough research by far has been done. Do you, into father? I think it's very good, high quality.
Yeah.
But I think it's minimal compared to
the other side.
Yeah, and I'm not disparaging it in any way.
Yeah.
All I'm questioning is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I think that's correct. Yeah, how do I want to say this?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think it would be quite hard to find people today who just said, when you spoke to them, that, you know, kids don't really need to see their dads, you know, like, all their dads need to do is provide for them and then that's enough. You know, that sort of 1950s attitude. I don't think that many people would agree with that anymore, but at the same time, it's somehow still, that state of affairs is sort of still coming. it's manifesting, you know, because there's such high rates of fatherlessness, and the act of blocking a father's access to his child is kind of really easy for someone to do. I mean, you don't really have to. It sort of scrambles my brain a little bit. I'm just.
But I wonder if what we're talking about is the difference between conscious and unconscious bias.
Yeah.
You know, we might say that, but actually we're allowing it to happen.
That's it. That's the difference. Yeah.
And then lastly, good old male sexuality seen as a source of harm, threat, abuse and power. This idea of men being rapists or abusers or rapers or abusers in waiting kind of thing. And their sexuality is rarely celebrated. Seager and Barry say indirectly through the arts. I'm not quite sure what they meant by that. Do you know what they mean by that, indirectly through the arts? Men's sexuality being celebrated. I couldn't quite get that.
I don't really know about what's going on in art, but I imagine that you've probably got a fair amount more cover as an artist to express, you know, to celebrate male sexuality than you might do in other contexts.
Yes, okay.
Because it's a matter of interpretation, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how women are celebrated.
And males are minimised.
Yeah.
And then it's doing harm. So the next category, the first one was doing good, second one is doing harm. And just to, you know, remind viewers that the idea here is that men are more harmful than helpful and women are more helpful than harmful.
Yeah.
So if we go into the doing harm area, there's male magnification of doing harm. So that they mention rape culture, which has been, it doesn't seem to be based on anything. It's a sort of, you know, it's this idea of extrapolating horrible cases of the most damaged and sort of violent men, and then saying that's an example of how men are. So we need to do something about this, and we need to educate men to not be rapists. And actually, well, they talk about figures from 2012 in the US, but so I'm not sure if maybe there isn't any figures for the UK, but they say actually there's 99.4% of men, of adult males, aren't registered for sexual offences. So 99.4% aren't. So to what extent does that mean that there's a rape culture?
0.6 of men are registered for sexual offences, including rape. So that's, even that 0.6 isn't all rape.
Rape.
Yeah.
But there will be, you know, there'll be people who aren't in. There'll be rapists who aren't in that figure. But you know, I guess they're just saying like, let's actually look at what evidence is available, and it doesn't seem to reflect the story.
Well, they're suggesting, aren't they, that the vast majority of men are not sexually violent or dangerous, aren't they? But public perception is kind of contrary to that.
Yeah, and what a message to give to young boys. To really deeply not trust their own sexuality. But I do get that there is a. I'm listening to this course by Charles Eisenstein called The New Masculinity. Have you heard of Charles Eisenstein?
No, I haven't.
Really interesting American philosopher, and he's he writes and he speaks and he's got online courses on his website, and one of them is about masculinity. What's the next? And the question is like, what's the next iteration of masculinity? Because if orthodox traditional masculinity isn't working, then don't we need something to aspire to rather than just all this negative stuff, which I think is really, really nice idea. And
I just think orthodox masculinity is working in many, many cases.
It is. I totally agree.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, there's a lot of people that feel it isn't, and they want some kind of
academics, and I don't think those people are in the minority, the majority that think masculinity isn't working. Personally, I don't think there's a majority of people that think that.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting conversation to have. Where was I going?
Sorry, Charles Eisenstein. New masculinity. What's the next iteration? You were saying.
Yeah, so something in that course I was listening to last night. He's talking to one of the founders of a Band of Brothers, which is a British organisation that takes young men, often from they might have been involved in the prison system or probation stuff or whatever. So it's taking young men, not just young men, but it's aimed at young men like that, and taking them through an initiation process and helping them get a clear idea of what they want to be, how to be a man. And I mean, I don't know that much about it, but it sounds really inspiring. And why am I talking about that? Hang on. Yeah, okay, that was it. So there's this guy called Rex Brangwyn who he set up the first one of those in Brighton, and he's a very interesting character. I'm going slightly off topic here, but I'll just finish the point. He's like he does a lot of work with sort of erotic sensuality, and he does different types of healing work. He does all sorts of different things actually, but he's involved in that. He was involved in that group, in that organisation, and he was describing how, in his own experience in his life, he recognised that he was avoidant. His attachment style was avoidant, and he recognised that he had hurt a lot of people in relationships by sort of just cutting out. And he was making this conjecture that actually maybe quite a lot of men are get quite used to sort of concreting over their heart and just being kind of quite shut down in the world. And we could have the conversation about, well, maybe women do that as well, but specifically for men, he was saying like maybe, and some of this did really resonate with me, like how, because men get it levelled at them quite a lot that they don't have emotions and they're not empathic. And I think, yeah, that is true. If you've suppressed your own emotions enough, which is a really brutal piece of self-harm to do, and I know what that feels like. It's just like really horrible. Well, you numb out, don't you? But it's an act of self-harm, and then from that space you then can't feel other people, so you don't realise, you don't feel it when you're hurting them. And anyway, sort of going off here, but he was just saying, like, for him to come to try and get to secure attachment, he had to go through he had to move from avoidant into anxious attachment before he could make it to secure.
Yeah, right.
And he
attachment
said,
would be very threatening.
Yeah.
Anxiety provoking.
Yeah. And I guess that's what I just wanted to share, that in terms of if there is this doesn't mean that men need to do that. It's just that if men feel that something's missing in their life and they want to change, then you can change. And that thing about opening up and becoming more tender and more sensitive and more emotional can be a really beautiful thing to do, but you don't need to. It's not like everyone should do that.
No, I'm really glad you said that, Zac, because I think we need compassion, don't we, and empathy for all men.
Yes,
you know.
And there's nothing wrong with being a real hard ass, because we actually do need different people at different parts of the continuum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
it's a good word, isn't it?
It's really important to have that. We need soldiers. I mean, it'd be good if we didn't need soldiers, but yeah. Okay. Domestic violence is the next thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
I'd really like us to do a whole 1 or 2 or 3 on domestic abuse and the treatment in inverted commas programs.
Oh my god! I saw a really shocking thing the other day. It was like a slide. Someone sent me the slides of I think this woman works in a family law firm, but she does like seminars training people on domestic abuse, and some of her slides were just so factually incorrect, and so binary, so like male perpetrator, female victim. I was really shocked. I don't know why, because I kind of know that that's how it's portrayed.
But nonetheless,
but every time I see it, it's just like, what?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of magnification of male domestic abuse and minimisation, isn't there, of female domestic abuse? And researchers we know, Archer, Louise Dixon, Nicola Kevin Graham, in the Midland universities have all done an enormous amount of research that shows much more equivalence and symmetry between male and female domestic abuse.
And they give the example of how that plays out into the provision of services. So while male victims of intimate partner violence account for 33% of the total, they get less than 1% of refuge places.
Yeah.
And then moving on to how there's female minimization of doing harm.
Shall I pick up on that? Or
Go ahead. Yeah.
So it's like we were just saying, the equivalence of female domestic abuse or intimate partner violence isn't reflected in public attitudes or in policies. Women receive less severe prison sentences for some crimes. The high level of online emotional abuse, the cyberbullying type of abuse, goes uncommented upon. 52% of men in a sample of high security prisoners were sexually abused by women who were acting independently of men as children. The media doesn't carry a more complex or nuanced picture of child sexual abuse. It's really quite polarised, and still in the consciousness of most people it's men who are the sexual abuse perpetrators, isn't it? And then there's the transmission of this theory of toxic masculinity, and I know we've touched on it before in other recordings that we've done. It's like, where if this toxic masculinity does exist, where does it come from? And we have to own that women are the primary socialisers of boys. So, where does it come from? If women are the main influencers, the main socialisers, where does it come from?
And also, primary school teachers are mostly female.
Yes.
as well.
That's true.
And
yes.
and you know I remember reading some research that was looking at prison inmates in general. You know, most inmates are male, and you know, I mean, sort of like 93% or something. And out of them, they mostly grew up in single mother families. So there's a real correlation between. It's not just
Yes.
There's loads of links there.
Yes, so there's a lack of male influence. That's what you're saying.
There's a lack of male influence. Yeah,
in the most antisocial, if you like, members of society.
And that goes to attachment theory as well, because you know, like when you're growing up and you have a secure attachment with your caregivers, they sort of help you down regulate your limbic. You know, we all have innate aggression in us as humans, and if we're socialised well, we kind of get good at using our frontal cortex to down regulate the you know, the aggression or fight-flight response. And if you're growing up in a single parent family, you're less likely to get that. It takes a lot of energy to instill that in a child, doesn't it? And I think, I mean, I'm probably going to go slightly. I can't verify this with like research, but I have. Maybe it was the Steve Biddulph book I read ages ago. I can't remember where I read it, but there's that tendency for the father figure to be the disciplined boundary holder and be the one who sets conditions, whereas the mother figure is often the one who's more graceful and will just always offer compassion and love no matter what the child's done. Whereas the father figure might sort of say, I'll give you this present if you do well in the test or something like that. And I'm just thinking of that because of that pressure to down, you know, like that sort of relationship maybe supports this. It's hard work, isn't it? Like learning to regulate your own emotions. I mean, it takes.
I was thinking of the whole process of roughhousing, you know, and wrestling. And that's a vehicle or a channel of expressing aggression, but also kind of learning where the limits are around it.
Yeah.
And that's something that you just don't get with many mums, I would say. That whole roughhousing and wrestling.
I mean, it's hard being a single mum. You can't do it all. You've got to like. Oh my God! It's not their fault, but it's just the reality that the child can't get certain things.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I've lost the plot. Where are we?
You were doing toxic masculinity, I think,
right?
were
Toxic
you?
Masculinity, yeah. Am I doing magnification? No, magnification.
So this is now,
no, female minimization I'm doing, aren't I? Yeah, so less severe sentences for crime, better health and living conditions, generally. Mothers who are prisoners get better access to their children, in a way.
Oh God,
fathers often don't. Yet there is a public perception of women being oppressed in a male-centric prison system. Baroness Corsten's had something to say about that in the Guardian article. Underachieving, you know, in OECD countries, significantly more young women are graduating from school or college, and it's a ratio of 13 to 10 girls to boys going to university, so that's a big difference. And Seager and Barry are saying that while there are still more men in the very top jobs in academia, 0.3% of the jobs. Women still outnumber men in the rest of the hierarchy.
And young women earn more than young men now. Women in their 20s.
They do, absolutely. Yeah. that women often get the parental privilege. It's widespread in many countries that if there is a parental dispute about residency, then
Custody.
sole custody,
Yeah.
it's more likely to be awarded to the female, almost by default.
Yeah.
And then maternity privilege, antenatal, prenatal, postnatal services. I mean, rightly so, women are looked after in those processes, but men are very, very, very little cared about in those processes, aren't they?
Yeah. And there's no parity in paternity leave or anything like that, is there? Still?
No. And protection, I mean, women enjoy the protection of men. Women and children enjoy the protection of men at times of greater risk. And I'd say war and peacetime, men are protectors. And arguably females enjoy power and privileges, and there has been some research written about this within the domestic sphere, within the household domain. That's not to say all females enjoy that, but just to acknowledge that there is some enjoyment to be gained from it.
Yeah. I mean, if people just think about people they know in their own lives, like, are all the women oppressed? Like some are, but some men are oppressed. It's not.
Yes.
It's just a really.
Well, I might feel oppressed doing some of the jobs that men are required to do. Or the roles that men are required to do. Often required to do roles really without the resources. If you're meant to be a provider, but if there aren't any jobs or you're in low paid work, that's quite a big ask of somebody, isn't it, who isn't very well resourced. That doesn't feel like privilege to me. That feels quite oppressive.
And there's no excuses really. It's like you've got to figure it out. But still, I struggle with the word oppressed and oppression. I've often wondered. It just doesn't seem like the right word. Seems like
it feels a bit
hyperbolic.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah. So, are we moving on to
male minimization? Yes. Yeah.
Hang on. No, doing harm. We were doing harm. Now we're going to do receive good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right? Or have we missed
I
a
thought
bit?
we just done receive.
So in the category receive good.
Yeah.
This is magnified for males. So this is the idea of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
So basically, being a man, you've won the lottery because you get paid better. You don't. You get better jobs. You get everything's easier. So they critique this by saying, despite the idea of patriarchy being a received wisdom, it's very widespread. It's accepted almost without question these days. It's actually been subject to relatively little academic evaluation, let alone empirical testing as a scientific hypothesis. It minimises the vast majority of men who are working class, like you were saying earlier. Homeless men, parentally alienated men, suicidal men, and other disadvantaged male groups. And it minimises the benefits of motherhood, family and domestic life for many women. And they go on to say, like I mentioned earlier, that young women in the UK now earn more on average than their male counterparts. And the gender pay gap is misunderstood.
Yes, that takes quite a bit of unpicking, doesn't it? The gender pay gap. There's a really good audio on Freakonomics. Have you heard it?
No.
You might know another good distillation of it. But on Freakonomics, there's a really good, comprehensive laying out.
Is that a podcast?
Yes, of all the different factors that we need to take into account.
You need to control all the factors. You can't just look at the whole thing. And there's, you know, Warren Farrell in his book The Boy Crisis does a similar job on it, and various people have. Jordan Peterson's done it loads of times, and it's not that hard to once you control the elements, it's not that hard to see that there isn't really a gender pay gap. But what Warren Farrell also does is he discovered that by looking at this is in the US, you know, over their lifetimes men earn more but women spend more, and when men and women die, women are worth more. So women earn less, spend more, and die with more money than men. So there's obviously this transfer of wealth happening through the lifespan.
That's interesting.
And female minimization in terms of receiving good.
Well, this is where it gets. It has been a little bit repetitive, but actually, I've welcomed repetition because it
goes in.
Yeah, exactly. So again, the less severe
penalties for the same crimes.
Yes. Yeah. And underachieving in schools. I think I've gone through these actually accidentally in advance.
I've got some notes that seem different. Like they this is what you were saying earlier. They, you know, mothers who are prisoners get better access to their children than fathers who are prisoners. Yeah, you did say this.
Sorry, I've been a bit premature there.
Yeah, this is the stuff about education. So okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, so and then there's another category, receive bad. So, you know, what that means is, are you a victim? And, you know, the hypothesis by Seager and Barry is that that's very much minimised for males.
Yeah, men's disadvantage is minimised, isn't it?
Or invisible. So they say, well, there's no gender death gap debate, and why not? Because men die younger. And actually this has been happening for ages. I saw an article on Twitter earlier today. Warren Farrell published he shared an article that he'd written for the New York Post in 1971, where he was talking about men dying earlier and having all these horrible health issues because of the amount of stress they were carrying around.
Right.
And you know, there's been no conversation about that for 50 years.
No.
Less investment in prostate cancer than breast cancer, even though the death rates are similar.
Yeah.
Homelessness is 85% male in the UK. There's no gender policies on that. Like you said earlier, boys are a third less likely to attend uni than girls in the UK.
But no one's up in arms about a gender education gap, are they?
Yeah. Suicide is 3/4 male. And in terms of therapy and support, they're making the case that when in distress, women tend to want to talk about their feelings, whereas men tend to want to fix whatever is causing distress. However, mental health services are delivered in a gender-blind way, so that treatment options that might suit men better are rarely considered. Yeah.
There's something I think in psychology, psychotherapy, counselling, whereby feelings are put at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And the thinking is next and the doing is last.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and I'm not going to generalise, nor would you, but sometimes that needs to be swapped around.
Depending on the client.
Exactly, depending on the client.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost as though doing is frowned upon. You know.
Yeah, it's almost like a pejorative activity term. It's like, don't try and fix anything, just feel it. Yes. And you know, there's a space for that.
There's
I'm not
absolutely
criticising
a space
that.
for that. No,
but
I'm not either. But I'm
yeah.
just saying it ought to be valued. A bit like traditional masculinity ought to be valued.
Yeah. Because sometimes
doing and
sometimes you do need to do stuff. Especially if you know got a lot of bills to pay and people to support, and you know, I don't want to go down that. I'm not saying that that's the only way things can be, but a lot of men are actually just in that situation where they feel that if they let go and crumple, then they're going to be letting a lot of people down. There's no real luxury of being able to do that, and if that's where they're at, then we need to be able to honour that.
Absolutely.
And work with it.
Absolutely.
Not criticise it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't know this thing about colour blindness. You know, males.
No, I didn't.
8% of boys are colourblind, but only 0.5% of girls.
No.
But it's not. A large educational board in the UK recently declined to make graphs in exam papers more colourblind friendly. So no one's interested in catering for that.
Or given the opportunity to adjust to people who are boys who are colourblind, and they can't be bothered.
No. Yeah, there's a disparity in psychology papers dedicated to women and women's issues versus men.
Yeah. Yes, and I was noticing there's a majority of trainings that support women's issues. So the most recent one I saw was Women and Trauma.
I saw that. Was that from Pessy?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should set up a Men and Trauma training.
Well, yeah. My sort of thesis. It's not really a thesis. It's just a fact. I think that. Well, there's loads of examples of trauma that goes unrecognised in men, but the obvious one for me is losing child access. It's like what could be more traumatic than losing access to your, to your own child? It's like a huge attachment disruption that affects the child and the parent, and it's mostly the dad. And I just think if that single thing was acknowledged, that would actually do a lot of good to help, the judiciary and the family court system understand what's going on when, to contextualise things. Like if you're in a trauma response, then it means that you're like very unwell, you're sick. And you're not. It's discrimination to start judging people for
for their trauma behaviours.
If you kill someone and you go to court, you can make the argument that you've got diminished responsibility. I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's actually a really serious condition that isn't. There's not even. There's no acknowledgement whatsoever about that.
There's a massive empathy gap there, isn't there? And my one thing is the misandry environment that we live in, and how that penetrates men as boys and growing up, that is unconsciously there all the time, that shames men all the time. That's my one thing really that I would like to help get addressed more, and that's what I'm presenting on at the International Men's Conference.
Oh, great!
What are you mentioned what you're presenting?
My presentation at the conference is it's about working with men who are experiencing the trauma of losing child access. So I just share a little bit about my story, and then I just share a bit about how I work and what the kind of stuff that comes up. But I don't think a lot of men in that situation are actually aware what they're going through. They're just trying to figure out the logistical response to okay, well, I need to figure out how to do that. I need to do the court case, and then I need to, But actually, they're going through this massive trauma, and
it's a kind of survival mode operating, isn't there?
And at a certain point, it just gets really difficult to function because you're in sort of traumatic stress.
Yes, at a time where you've got to. Well, it's a massive transition, isn't it? You've got to transition. You've got to do your best to maintain your father role. You've got to get over if the separation isn't your choice. There's so much going on.
And even if it is your choice, you've still got to grieve it. But I really look forward to hearing your video.
And likewise.
Good. It's getting a bit dark. I wonder if it still can be seen, or just little voices coming out. Maybe I should put the big light on.
Is it turning into an audio?
Hang on a second. I'm not very professional, but it doesn't matter. I used to be a perfectionist, but now it's gone the other way.
Oh, you're a recovering perfectionist. So that was the psychology papers, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then there's the field experiments in domestic violence.
Yeah. So people don't bother intervene if people are walking past an incident of domestic violence. There was this experiment done in Australia, I think. People will help a woman, but they'll ignore or laugh at a man who's being attacked.
There's a Marx Brooks video, isn't there? A Mankind video, which I'd really invite people to look at.
I don't think I've seen that.
It's called Violence is Violence.
Yeah.
And it's in London, and it's exactly the same scenario where the perpetrator's a female. People just ignore it, laugh about it, walk away, but where the perpetrator's male, people start getting involved and threaten to call the police. So that's the kind of British version.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned did you mention the Boko Haram case? No, it's a really interesting comparison. I didn't know about this. So 300 female students were kidnapped in 2014 in Nigeria by Boko Haram, and it was a horrible. I remember that it was a massive news story.
Yes.
But what I didn't know was that 10,000 boys were abducted and many murdered.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Well, they rest their case, don't they? That you didn't know that.
Yeah.
I only knew that because Karen Strawn talked about it in an interview at one of the conferences. She brought it to my attention.
Right.
But it wasn't in the mainstream media. That 10,000 boys were abducted, some of them murdered.
God. And then FGM, female genital mutilation, is illegal. It's illegal, but male genital mutilation is still endorsed in a lot of countries, including the US, and it's completely routine here. And I was circumcised, and I really don't think it's a good thing. I didn't really have a lot of awareness of what it actually really meant until I saw a documentary. I think it premiered at the conference we were at, didn't it? And everyone was just devastated. Everyone was in tears, weren't they?
Well, yes, the trauma of the event was really impacted.
Oh God!
Yeah, the viewers, didn't it? The audience.
So in that film, they get. Oh God! It's just, I'm remembering it now. It's sort of like fly on the wall of like what actually happens. So this baby's just been born, and then it's put on a gurney, and it's taken in to this operation, and it has a bit of its body cut off. You know, what's happening in its brain? I mean, what's happening in its... That's trauma.
Absolutely.
Shortly after being born.
That gets imprinted somewhere, isn't it, about what the world is like, what other people are like. Obviously it's not in the front brain, because that's not anywhere near developed, but in the bones of the person.
It really goes through me. And
it's really distressing.
It's really awful.
Really distressing.
Yeah, so female magnification of being a victim, of receiving bad.
Yes.
So female magnification.
Yes. So the domestic violence field is the obvious one, isn't it? Where women are constructed as entirely victims and men are constructed as entirely perpetrators. When, as I said earlier, there's a lot of evidence to support that it's much more symmetrical than that. I would really like to see refuges for men and women, and treatment groups for men and women together. You know, I really think that would be a much more realistic, clinically beneficial way of dealing with it. I think there'd be a lot of healing all round. Yeah, I really do think that.
I agree.
Yeah. And then back to rape culture again, exaggerating the perception of men as rapists or potential rapists, creating a climate of fear. I've been really thinking about fear lately, you know, especially with all that's happening around COVID-19, about the generation of fear in people and how disabling it is. And I really feel quite enraged about generating fear in people. I really do feel like that's a kind of psychological rape, you know. So I'm pretty angry about that at the moment. And it's like you're saying, these stereotypes are based on massively distorted generalisations of very small samples of damaged, injured men. And then Boko Haram demonstrating much greater empathy for females than for males.
Yeah. So then they take a look at, like, okay, so if we accept that there are these cognitive biases, how can we explain them? Like, why are they there? And they go to their usual port of call, which is it's an adaptive function. That's one of the first things they say.
I liked why they did that though, because they're kind of not looking to blame, are they?
No.
Yeah, they're looking to explain, and I quite liked their motivation there. So the women are wonderful effect, why we favour women, what they're calling a halo effect for women,
Yeah.
May involve emotional reasoning. Emotions are a guide in making conclusions about others. And what Seager and Barry are saying, that a lot of us may be predisposed to think well of women if we've had good early experiences of caregiving with women, and women are the majority caregivers, so
they're the good people.
Yes.
And we don't really know about the men.
Yeah.
They're potentially a bit not good. Yeah.
And what you were saying, it makes sense that women are more valuable because of their reproductive role. And he talks about which village is likely to survive better, a village with 100 women and 1 man, or 100 men and 1 woman.
Well, I got confused with that, because I thought, well, if you went into a village, if you had 2 machine guns, or no, I don't know, like, isn't it easier to go into a village and kill 100 pregnant women and 1 man than it is to kill 100 men and 1 pregnant woman? I mean, I know what they mean, but I was just thinking in terms of actual survival. Like, imagine if you had 100 pregnant women and only 1 man to protect them and like do the harvest.
That is so true. Yes, and the hunting.
Yeah, but I get what they mean. I just don't think that really.
No,
works.
on a purely in a very small way.
Well, maybe not all the women would get pregnant. Yeah, okay. They could they could kind of stagger it, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want to look at why we disfavour men?
Why we disfavour men? Yeah. So it's the adaptive thing. Over many thousands of years, social attitudes would be calibrated to associate femininity with nurturing and vulnerability, and masculinity with protection and strength. Because of this, it would be more difficult, unconsciously and consciously, to feel the same level of emotional sympathy for a male than a female. That seems kind of rational and logical.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose it's quite hard to get specific. Like, how does that? I don't know any of the science around that. I kind of know that we pick up patterns of ways of being. We don't just get our DNA, do we? We also get, there's like epigenetics but I don't know. I don't really have the kind of hinterland of knowledge to know whether or not we can be predisposed to empathise with one gender over another, just because loads of our ancestors have done that. But I guess they must be. It must at least be a plausible idea.
It makes some sense to me that if men are the protectors, then we need to emphasise their strength as opposed to their vulnerability. And if they're strong, they don't need our empathy or our sympathy.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't have to be like that. But I can see they're trying to explain why it has ended up like that. They're not saying this is always the case.
No.
Yeah. In-group favouritism and out-group bias is a cornerstone of social psychology.
I felt really sad when I read this. Yeah, you did go on. Sorry, I just was really impacted by it, this idea that men don't have any in-group bias.
That came up in our last article, didn't it? The strength of such biases vary by group. Men in general, historically and cross-culturally, have had higher status than women in the public realm, so one might expect that male identity invokes a high level of in-group bias. However, research shows that uniquely in social identity theory, What's that? I don't know. Male identity, unlike female identity, invokes no significant in-group bias. Men support each other when the identity is based on something other than being male. But how do we explain the incohesive effect of male identity? Several possibilities are: it could be that because infant attachment mostly happens with mothers, this programs for greater bias towards women in later life. Yeah, I think that's something. And it could be that men are stereotypically more associated with violence and aggression, and thus invoke less sympathy, even from each other. Yeah, I think that's quite plausible as well. It's likely that seeing men as protectors rather than receivers of protection leads to a lack of sympathetic bias and leads to male gender blindness. Yeah. So that facilitates the gender empathy gap. And
I was really glad when we got to the intersectionality bit, because all the way through I was thinking, what about what about misandry, or what about the radical feminist ideology that's kind of contaminated the social sciences, including psychology. And I think they've been very politically astute to avoid that, and to really focus on the biology and the evolution, and I really applaud them for that. But there is this little mention here now,
and you were like,
of intersectionality, which is a central tenet of feminist thinking, and it has transformed. I don't like to use the word transformed in this instance. I want to say corrupted, but anyway, how it has transformed how gender is conceptualised in research.
And just, I don't want to interrupt you for too long, but it's also changed how we talk about everything. From the World Economic Forum. I tweeted the other day that they're completely down with intersectionality. It's just like, what the hell are you doing? It's the most divisive ideology.
It is very divisive.
And it doesn't lead to any good outcomes. It only leads to conflict.
Well, to my mind, it's a kind of a hierarchy of victimhood. It's like, who's the most disadvantaged and who's the least disadvantaged. And I think Seager and Barry express it really succinctly, really well. So they're saying, through this lens, through the radical feminist lens, or intersectionality, lens, men are historically provisioned, don't deserve help or attention. Unless they're also a member of one of these other intersections. So if they're also, for example, black, or they're disabled, or they're gay, if they're in any other one of these intersectionalities, or religion or whatever, then they're more worthy of attention and support and help. But if you're just male, and really what isn't said here, that I don't even know if they were saying it implicitly, if you're white male, then
good luck.
You're not deserving, you're least deserving, I should say, you're least deserving.
And actually white working class men are the most in trouble group, probably, in the UK, maybe America.
Yes. Yeah. So I was really pleased, and they discuss how, if we hone in on intersectionality, how that doesn't look at men in general. It doesn't look at the issues that the disadvantages that men experience, whatever intersectionality group you're in. It's almost like flack or distraction, isn't it?
It's genius.
Well, if it was a political campaign.
But they also say that take all the group, even if you do allow the men to be broken down into those intersectional, disabled men, black men, gay men, they all still have higher rates of these pathologies, like
yes,
not pathologies, but victimhood, harm,
yeah.
receiving harm.
Yeah.
They still kill themselves more often, or try to, and they still. I can't remember
They're
what they say.
underachieving, aren't they?
Underachieving,
in education, and they still don't live as long.
Yeah, so they say that there is a main effect of being male that runs through all levels of the variable. For example, when it comes to suicide, not only do men in general kill themselves more frequently, but BAME men kill themselves more frequently than BAME women.
Yeah.
And gay men attempt to kill themselves more frequently than gay women.
Yeah.
Similarly, the academic underperformance of boys cuts across all social strata and geographies.
Yeah.
So it's pretty, like even on their own terms, the intersectionalists can't use that. You've just got to use it to pin them down with their own game.
Yes.
If you can be bothered. I mean, I can't really be bothered to have these sorts of conversations with people. It's just pointless.
No.
So.
No. Well, I put things in my podcast.
Yeah.
But
But do you know what I mean? Like having actually having that sort of conversation with someone who's not interested in the learn. I don't want to sound patronising, but not interested in changing their position based on information.
So they then go on to talk about the various ways in which gender blindness is a cause and effect of the way we study gender. So the concept of masculinities, plural, largely based on subjective judgments by theorists trying to make the case for an alternative hegemonic masculinity or masculinities. What I understand by that is that there's various theorists competing to propose what the next hegemonic masculinity should be.
Well, no, I actually think what they meant there is trying to make the case for alternatives to hegemonic masculinity, but they forgot to say to.
If they did,
maybe.
But I also wonder. I do feel like there's some competition between theorists about what man should be, what men should be like. So maybe there's both in there. And these theorists minimise the difference between men and women, and Seager and Barry tell us that it's distasteful almost to raise the idea in psychology or sexual sciences that there are differences between men and women.
But they do that and simultaneously treat men differently to women. So they're sort of like, they're so contradictory how they do.
Yes. The attempt to identify multiple versions of masculinity runs the risk of obscuring the universal qualities of masculinity. I liked what they said about in terms of therapy. Men across all demographic groups respond to therapy in a similar way.
Yeah, we haven't done that chapter, I don't think, have we? Maybe we should do that next.
Yeah, should we do it next? I'd quite be interested in that. Yeah, so what Seager and Barry are saying, the concept of intersectionality really isn't clinically useful, and it's not practically useful.
I don't think it's useful on any level whatsoever.
Then the metaphor of the blind man touching the elephant's tail and thinking it's a snake.
Yeah, and this quote from Damien Ridge: masculinity has essentially become what different theorists and their followers say it is.
Yeah.
And something that probably means little to the average man.
Yes, I like that.
And there's patriarchy theory, where women are seen as oppressed by the role of housewife and men are seen as liberated in the role of breadwinner.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, I mean, I immediately thought of Bill Burr. Have you heard of the comedian Bill Burr?
Yeah.
He's so funny.
Yeah.
He does it. He's done really funny little bits on how jealous he was of his wife, you know, because he'd be out working all day and then he'll get home and she's just sort of like putting a DVD in the TV to show to their like little daughter, and it's just, you know, like, it's just how you look at it, isn't it? Like, it's not, it's definitely not beyond debate that.
I just think everything has a blessing and a curse in it, and it seems to me that when it comes to gender, we don't really look at it through everything, and everyone has a blessing and a curse. You know, one's cursed and one's blessed, and that's the end of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and this idea from Dench, who suggested that the idea of the traditional male role as desirable rather than a burden was a way to encourage men to accept a supporting role in society, one that is ultimately of lesser value. So basically they've got a bum deal, they have to go out to jobs they don't like most of the week, and that was sort of tickled up as a sort of really good thing because they could feel good about being useful.
Right.
Which I think says a lot about why men are maybe in a little bit of a crisis now, because there's no feel-goodness around going out and putting the bread on the table. There's sort of like maybe more negativity, like, well, you only do that because you're more privileged and you get paid better. I mean, I know I can relate to that. But it's sort of not.
Yeah, so contributions not only not acknowledged, but can be, well, minimised or discounted.
Yeah.
Made wrong or bad or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they acknowledge here that this whole concept they've called gamma bias. Is that because of the word gender? Why have they come up with the word gamma? I was trying to work that out, but they don't explain it.
I did Google the terms actually, so that I had an idea of what I was. There is a very good reason for it. It's very absent. Gamma bias occurs when one gender difference minimised, one another's magnified. That's all it said.
I was just wondering what the word. Yeah.
G for gender. Yeah, it could be, couldn't it?
So yeah, they're being, you know, modest around saying, look, this is what they've presented here is really just quite. It's sort of an initial series of propositions, and maybe the research is not. This is just the beginning, but they've got an intention.
It's a hypothesis.
It's a hypothesis,
now, isn't it? Yeah.
But they seem to. It feels to me like they've made quite a succinct proposition around, you know, just a way of comparing how men and women are. Yeah, the cognitive biases and how they're perceived. So
I think they've been very smart in taking a psychological lens, you know, the cognitive distortion as a psychological component of depression or whatever. I think, and something that would need addressing. I think they've been quite astute to take that as a lens to look at gender through.
It's really good.
And it kind of implies that it needs some treatment or it needs some
attention.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great chapter. Really
Thank you.
that.
Enjoyed that.
Thank you, Zac. Really good.
Feel like I was really a bit all over the place today, but that's okay.
Yeah. Who knows where these things will take us.